Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest Cristina P. Simmons. Cristina is a best-selling author, TEDx speaker, trauma-informed occupational therapist, and publisher. Inspired by her personal journey, she now helps women turn pain into purpose through storytelling. As the founder of Soul Story Collective, she blends clinical expertise and lived experience to guide women in healing, regulating their nervous systems, and sharing their stories with clarity, strength, and impact. She believes every woman's story holds the power to heal not only herself, but others. Cristina, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. It's a pleasure having you on the program today.
I'm so excited to be here. It seems like we've had this on the calendar forever, so I'm excited that it's finally here.
Yeah, it seems like we have. I think we talked probably initially about a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
We were introduced by Jess Boyer. Jess is a really esteemed colleague and friend, and she was on my podcast. I was on hers. And she introduced the two of us, and I know we had a great introductory chat and found alignment for an episode, so here we are.
Yeah, I love Jess. And Jess and I have so many things in common. When I read her book, because we met at an event and didn't know anything about each other, and she gave me a copy of her book, and I read it on the way home, on the plane, and I just couldn't believe how aligned our stories were, and we were going through a lot of the same things at the same time, so it's just crazy how God connects people.
Yeah, and sometimes the books and people that are meant to find us just find us at the time that we need it most.
Exactly.
So, my first question, tell our audience about the major experience or experiences that have shaped what you do today, Cristina.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with my son. Well, a little bit of backstory. My husband and I have 3 children, but all of our children are adopted because we carry a rare gene that made very sick babies, and so we ended up losing 3 biological children. But God blessed us with the miracle of adoption, and we adopted 2 girls and a boy. And then our son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum at the age of 4. And that changed the entire trajectory of my whole family's life because our son he was kind of ruling our household at the time because of his sensory issues and meltdowns. And we couldn't find any daycare. He was getting kicked out of all the schools that he was in. And so as a mom, I felt that it was my job to figure out how to best raise him. And at the time, I could not find any help. We got him diagnosed. So, went through all of the testing, very lengthy testing at a very prestigious hospital. And that was overwhelming, because then they're telling us all these things that he needs. And I didn't have any idea where to find these things. They gave you all the pamphlets and all that stuff, but it's still up to you as the parent to make all these things happen. And they handed me a pamphlet about occupational therapy. And I had no idea what occupational therapy was. And so I started to research, and the more that I looked into occupational therapy, the more I fell in love with it because of the holistic nature of it. And so that really, it goes into my work today because I love to look at the person as a whole. And I think you need to really look at everything you've been through, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, all those things that go into making up a person. Long story short, I went back to school to get my master's degree in occupational therapy so that we could better raise our son. That was really my only intent back then, was to be able to better understand him so that we could better raise him. But it completely changed the entire trajectory of my life and, a different career. It led me even into being able to write my own story because it had such an impact on me. And then now I've opened a publishing company to help other women write their stories. And so that's why I said in my bio, it says my personal journey, but my personal journey then became my professional career. So
For those in the audience who may not be aware, what does an occupational therapist do?
So that was another thing I loved about occupational therapy. We can do a lot of different things. I have worked in a hand clinic. I have worked in geriatrics. I've worked with elderly people in skilled nursing facilities. I've done home health. I have worked in the school system. I have worked in outpatient clinics. So occupational therapists can do a lot of things. Like when I worked in the hand clinic, it was very orthopedic based. So we were dealing with hand injuries, hand surgeries, broken arms, that kind of thing. So we can work in a little bit of like a physical therapy capacity, so rehabilitation. But a lot of the times, especially like in skilled nursing facilities and then in the pediatrics, working in the outpatient clinics and in the school system, you're working with the families, you're working with the parents, you're working with the child, you're working with the teachers. So really it's called occupational therapy because it's to get people to be more independent in their everyday life. That's our main goal. And so we use strategies and skills to not tell them what to do, but to be able to do it independently. And sometimes you have to relearn. I also worked with a lot of stroke patients. Then sometimes you have to relearn things, which has another holistic connotation to it. So
I think with any therapy, whether it's OT, PT, or just regular psychotherapy, you can't ignore the holistic framework of the individual. And that includes, emotionally, psychologically, physically, and also spiritually. All of that has to be taken into account. And I know in particular with Reiki, I think the American Occupational Therapy Association has recognized Reiki as a practice, as something that is within the realm of doing occupational therapy. So I think there's been that kind of integration piece as well too, which really, I think, reiterates their belief and their commitment to treating the whole person. So
we use a lot of creativity in occupational therapy, a lot of art therapy, a lot of play therapy, pretty much anything you can use when you're doing occupational therapy work.
And I have a lot of respect for the occupational therapy profession. We got a really great occupational therapy program at Utica University, and I tell the OT students, other than the Psych Child Life students, the OT students are my favorite. They're just great to work with, and they're very much engaged in learning, and they have a thirst to learn new things and how they can incorporate that into their OT background. Now, my understanding is a lot of the challenges you've had in your life with adoption, losing 3 biological children, a lot of those challenges were interwoven with food. Am I correct?
Yes.
Can you explain that union to us?
Yeah, so that actually started with my dad, and that's how my book starts, is the story of me and my dad, a little bit of the story of me and my dad and the forgiveness that I had to give to him. But a lot of the unhealthy habits that I learned came from my dad because my dad used food a lot to self-soothe. And because I've often said, if he had been a drinker, he would have been an alcoholic, but food was his drug of choice. And like things like I remember hearing him beating a bowl of ice cream at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning because I think he thought that if nobody saw him eat it, then it never happened. And so I learned at an early age that food could be shameful, but I also learned that it was comforting. I was a very picky eater as a kid, and so I was made to stay at the table. As a lot in my generation, I just turned 50 years old last week. In my generation, you did what your parents told you, and there were a lot of rules and regulations that we all followed, and cleaning your dinner plate was one of those because we were all taught that we needed to be thankful for the food that we have because there were people who didn't have food, and it was rude if you didn't clear your plate. And so I sat many days at the table staring at a cold plate of food, kind of in a standoff because I didn't want to eat it. And so it created a very unhealthy relationship with food from a very early age. And so then when I had struggles in my life, I turned to food as a coping mechanism. But it was really in avoidance of the feelings that I was really having. And so through all this occupational therapy work, because my son was so sensory, that's another thing that occupational therapists do. We work a lot with sensory and the nervous system. And I realized because he had a lot of trouble with food when he was little because of the sensory. So smells, textures, all those kinds of things. And so I was literally standing in my pantry one day, staring at all of the junk food in there, 3 kids with cookies and crackers and all the things. And it just hit me like, I am not hungry, I'm sad. And so then I started to associate the types of foods that I was eating with the emotions that I was having. And so I realized that when I was sad, I wanted first start with anxious because that was my biggest emotion at the time. When I was anxious, I wanted crunchy salty because I really wanted that input in my mouth, that crunch sensation. When I was sad, I would want a pudding or a cake type of substance. If I was angry, I wanted something hearty, like a chili, a big fat cheeseburger that I could really sink my teeth into. So I just really started associating the feelings that I was having with the foods that I was eating and then learning how to redirect myself from the food with other, more healthy ways to process my feelings.
I mean, I had challenges with food for a lot of different reasons. And until I made a commitment over about 5.5 years ago to go on a healthy lifestyle plan, I went on Noom, lost about 70 pounds, and I redefined my relationship with food. But growing up, I was raised in a Lebanese household, and everything we did was revolved around food.
Mhm.
I just learned that food was a way that we got the family together to make decisions. Food was also a way to self-soothe, um, and to deal with different emotions or challenges. So it took me a long time to really redefine my relationship with food. But once I do, I've learned now that rather than living to eat, I eat to live. I just try to make more mindful choices. What did you do different? What was your strategy for redefining your relationship with food? And so what worked to help you do that?
Yeah, and don't think that I'm perfect. I still can be an emotional eater. So just for you that's listening, it's a kind of a lifelong journey, but I just really started to try to get better habits and redirect myself, just much like I had to redirect my son in certain things. So if I found myself standing at the refrigerator in the pantry and I was emotional, I would do something like maybe have a tea or coffee instead of eating, because that's soothing as well. I needed to re-engage with nature and to walk outside and to move my body. And movement has been a huge thing for me. I love to lift heavy weights and have been I was a gym rat for about 15 years. And then when we live out in the country now, and we moved out here, it's too far away for me to go to the gym. So we have a gym in our garage. But movement and lifting heavy weights is another way that I can really redirect my nervous system, because that's really what I'm craving, is that push-pull feeling. And that was something else that I learned from my son, that when he was upset, if he did something with a push-pull, or we would used to wrap him up in a yoga mat. We used to call him a Judson burrito and wrap him really, really tight, kind of like when you used to swaddle babies. That would calm him. So I took those principles that I used with him and used them on myself.
Yeah, it's basically just learning to look at food differently. And one of those was when I started my healthy lifestyle plan. My wife likes her sweets, and I would never begrudge her that. First thing she said to me is she said, "Dave, I'm going to have to hide the sweets." I said, "No." I said, "I need to learn how to deal with that. I need to learn that if the sweet is there, I don't necessarily have to eat it, and I can redefine my relationship with it. I can ask myself questions like, do I really need that? Or if I'm feeling stressed or if I'm feeling a little confused, rather than sweet, can I grab a piece of fruit?"
Mm-hmm.
But having those sweet treats in front of me was actually a gift, because then it forced me to take a look at my relationship with sweets, particularly as it related to my emotions, and then, look at different food substitutions, healthier substitutions to deal with those same emotions.
Yeah, those are great. I'm kind of an all or nothing sort of a girl. So there is a lot of times where I will not buy things that I know I can't turn down.
Mhm.
And but I do resonate with what you're saying as well, because everywhere we go, there's going to be temptation.
Mhm.
I mean, and like you said, especially because I go to a lot of events. And so, what do you do when you get together? You have a party, you have an event, there's food everywhere. So there were, what I had to do personally was just make boundaries for myself and say, okay, I don't eat this anymore. I don't eat that anymore. It was kind of like a list of what I don't eat, and just had to remind myself that it was going to do more harm to me than good. And remember that the short sensation of whatever that food tastes like was not worth, the long-term negative effects it was going to have on me. So it really is a mental game.
Yeah. I think a lot of transformation, whether it's healthy lifestyle changes or other types of transitions we're making in our life, a lot of it is reframing, a lot of it is mindfulness, and a lot of the work I think is just as much mental as it is physical, but even more so mental. It's just rewiring our hard drive to look at things differently. So you mentioned your book earlier, Eat Your Feelings. So tell us about what inspired you to write that book and what you want the audience or your readers to take away from it.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I had been wanting to write this book for a very long time before I ever released it. So one of my other journeys was I had a tumor that they found inside my femur bone. And so that was in 2015. And I had to have two major leg surgeries. And so now I have a plate and screws permanently in my femur. It was a very quiet time in my life. Everything stopped because I had to recover from these surgeries. So I spent a lot of time in bed by myself, and I kept hearing, write the book, write the book, write the book. And I was thinking, write what book? Well, I don't even know what you're talking about, God. I just kept having this notion that I hadn't been through all of these hard challenges not to help other people.
Yep.
Like I was learning something from everything that I had been through. And so while I was in bed with nothing else to do except for recover, I started writing my book, and that was over 10 years ago. And so, life went on because I went back to school. I actually was diagnosed with that tumor right before I was supposed to start occupational therapy school. So it also put that on hold for a little bit until I could recover. So had to go through all the schooling and then the work and all the, life was life. But there was still always that little notion in the back of my head that I needed to write the book. And so I think through those 10 years, so many other things happened that went into the story. And so the book is essentially the story of my life. It's a teaching memoir is what they call it. I used to call it a self-help memoir, but now they term it a teaching memoir. But all throughout the book, I use my personal stories in order to help other people, sort of inject those or resonate with those and things in their own life. And then I offer what helped me. I'm not telling anybody else what to do or how to do it, but these are the things that helped me to overcome some of these challenges. I have some frameworks and things in there around food, around the mental work. I've done a lot of mirror work in my life. I was one of those girls that couldn't even look myself in the eye in the mirror. It was very uncomfortable for me because I had lost myself over the years through the grief and depression and anxiety and all those things. And so I had to get to know me again. I had to get to love me again in order for me to be able to love my family the way that they needed, and for me to be able to help my clients. The book is a story of our life, and then some teaching and strategies of maybe how you can use it in your life as well.
Yeah, I think those are the best kind of books that are driven by lived experience and practical strategies that have been developed from that lived experience. So, and I think with anything, when we're trying to overcome, we're trying to make a lifestyle choice, people will tell you, I know I need to do it, but I don't know how. So any type of book that can provide those strategies that can help them do that is going to be more valuable than just a how-to book with no strategies.
Right.
So, which is, yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be a how-to book. It would just be an incomplete book, I guess. So I saw a couple of reels on your Instagram page with the following captions. God has a way of reminding us we're not alone, and let yourself be seen. I mean, really be seen. So could you elaborate on those two aphorisms?
Yeah, so that has to do a lot with some of the mirror work that I was just talking about, but it really interesting because I was just in Costa Rica on my very first mission trip, and we were serving girls from the ages of 12 to 25 that had been sex trafficked, human trafficked. And so, but when we got there, I was actually born in Venezuela. Another fun fact. I know I look very American because I look just like my mom who was born in Nashville, Tennessee, but my dad's side of the family is from Venezuela, and that's where I was born. And so we arrive in Costa Rica in like the first day, full day that we were there. I was cooking and I went to grab the olive oil. Well, my maiden name is Borges or Borges as they pronounce it in Spanish. And I noticed that the manufacturer of the olive oil was my maiden name. And in that moment, I just realized my dad was there with me. Like I could feel my dad there. And, my dad and I did not have a very good relationship when he was alive. He was a very strict man. He was a very hard man. I was made to feel as if I didn't have a voice, that my opinions and my ideas didn't matter. That's how I grew up as a child. But just in the Hispanic culture, dads are in charge
Yeah.
and they are a lot of different cultures, I guess. That's how it is. The dad is in charge. You do what the dad says. You don't argue. You don't have your own ideas. And so that carried into my adulthood. And then that caused me to not be able to communicate with people very well because I didn't know what I needed or what I was feeling. So it just, in that moment when I saw that olive oil, it was just so funny how God uses these little things. Because the girl who was doing most of the cooking, she went and did all the shopping in Costa Rica because that's where she lives. And I'm sure there's other manufacturers of olive oil. Like she could have picked any olive oil. She just
Oh,
happened to grab that one. And so I just knew that my dad was there. And I ended up actually giving some of my testimony to the girls in Spanish. And that was one thing that my dad, he never taught us Spanish as kids. I wish he had. He worked a lot. So, he wasn't home to really talk with us a lot, but he always wanted me to be able to speak Spanish. And so I honored him in that way and translated some of my testimony and said it to the girls in Spanish, which I think was very meaningful to them. They knew I was trying, even if I butchered it.
uh-huh.
And so that's another part of being seen. I was vulnerable in those moments with those girls. And I think that vulnerability is one of those things that we have to be able to do in order to be in touch with other people and their feelings and to let them know that we're not perfect and we still struggle with things and they're not alone. You know what I mean? You're not alone in a lot of the things that you go through. And so that's what I meant by that, really, really put the things out there that you don't want to talk about because that's what people really want to hear. That's what they need to hear in order to know that they're not alone in all of their struggles.
Yeah, and I think there's such a misconception about vulnerability. A lot of people equate vulnerability with, I shared some intimate details once with somebody. I got violated. They violated my trust, so therefore I can't share again or I can't trust again. But vulnerability just means I trust you enough to
Hmm.
share a part of my story with you because you've been there, and I trust that you're going to be able to impact me without us having to have a long-term relationship. There's
Yeah, I
no,
love that perspective. That's beautiful. Yeah.
so as far as sensing the presence of your dad as well too, there's just so many stories I've heard of serendipity that remind us, one, that we're not alone and that our loved ones are never that far away.
Hmm.
Um, and if we're open to it, we can welcome their presence.
Yeah, I'm sure you've had some of that with your daughter as well.
Yeah, with my daughter and a few of my other ancestors as well too. Once you open yourself up to the fact that we live in a multidimensional universe and that energy can be transmitted from anywhere and we can connect with energy from any dimension, it just really reevaluates how we look at life, death, and life after death. And and it's I think a beautiful way to look at the world in terms of looking at it is just not the physical world, but other worlds. And I think vulnerability is a beautiful, very intimate practice if we understand what the true meaning of vulnerability is.
Yeah, because I actually ended up having a dream the last night I was there about my dad, that we were having dinner together. And so it was kind of a full circle moment. His energy is so different now that he's on the other side.
Mhm.
And I feel like all the time, like he's telling me, I didn't know. I didn't know how I was treating you. I didn't understand, because he didn't have the love, from his father necessarily. So the way that he learned love is how he passed it down to us. And so he didn't know any better. And that's how I finally was able to forgive him, because I realized that he was only doing the best that he could with what he had been taught.
Yeah, and forgiveness can occur at any time after our loved ones has passed. I mean, I did the same thing with my dad. My dad left when I was 5 years old.
Mm.
Never saw him again. Found out that he died when I was 11, and I found that out at the age of 14.
Mm.
But through pure serendipity, I met a relative on his side of the family, and she clued me in on the family history. And there was so much generational trauma, Christine, in that family. The trauma that he experienced, he could not function in a traditional marriage. He tried, but he just couldn't.
Yeah.
And so when it just became too overwhelming, particularly when my mom needed some type of emotional commitment from him, as his forefathers before him, he just took off and never came back. And once I understood that, I realized that he abandoned me, not because he didn't love me, but he left because he did love me.
Yeah.
And once I was able to look at that, I was able to forgive him and then find peace with that. The Soul Story Collective. I know you believe that stories are important, and especially I know you help women as a publisher, um, publish their stories. So tell us about the Soul Story Collective and what you do specifically to help women get their stories out there.
Yeah, this is one of the greatest passions of my life, really. I often wondered what my purpose was supposed to be, and it took me a while to find it. I think this is definitely one of my purposes on this earth, is to help other women tell their stories. But after I wrote my book and went through the whole process, with the publisher, and I love my publisher, and I had a developmental editor, and I loved my developmental editor, but through that whole process, I found a disconnect just because how heavy my story was and reliving a lot of these really hard times that I had gone through. And there was a lot of healing process in writing the book. And so I was telling my coach that I really wanted to get into developmental editing and that I could maybe do coaching around that. And then I could refer those clients to my publisher and let them publish the book. In true coach form, she said, well, why can't you just open your own publishing company? And I was like, oh, can I do that? Like, I didn't have any idea how to do that. And so I just started researching. The name came to me and I opened an LLC and started telling people that I wanted to help them write their stories. And now that's what I'm doing. And so actually, I'm so excited. I know this episode isn't going to come out until August, but we're recording it in July. And on July 25th, I'm flying to Texas for my Soul Story Collective's very first book launch in person. And it's actually an anthology of a nonprofit called One Chair at a Time. And it's a group of individuals that all have spinal cord injuries. And so there's 12 of them that all told their story in the book. And the book is going to be used, obviously, to raise money for the nonprofit. But what it's really going to be used for is to help other people who have acute spinal cord injury, like in the hospital, for them to be able to hand this book to them and to give them hope right away that their life can still be very full and beautiful. And, it's just different. I'm so proud of all of them. Most of them were not writers. And so we would get on Zoom like this and they would tell me their story. And then I put it I kept their voice in their words and all those things. And so I'm just super excited about that.
I have a good friend of mine who was never a writer. He's a construction major, but he's written a couple of books. He said, the secret to writing a good book is having a really good editor. And there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth to that. I think, it takes a team, and it takes, a team of individuals who I think, one, understand the nature of that person's story, understand the flavor, the context in terms of which they want to express that story. I would imagine some publishers kind of look at that and say, oh, okay, good, this is a project for me where I can infuse my own philosophy and make my own book. And those aren't the type of books that I think the book has to be from the voice of the author, and the publisher has to kind of nurture that so that voice comes out authentically.
Yes, that's really how I love to help my authors, is to write it from their voice. And so that's the feedback that I get a lot of times, even from my own book. But it was just like you were sitting across from a friend having a conversation. And that's how I like my clients' books to come across as well.
Yeah, I think any good book, any good podcast, it's like, you want to say it's like just two people having a really good conversation and individuals are getting something out of it. So, and they feel like they're a part of it as opposed to just being detached and a
Yes,
detached observer.
for sure.
Christine, I've got one surprise question for you.
Oh, surprise.
Yeah, it's a good surprise. It's a good surprise. If you were going to construct the perfect day for yourself, not for anybody else, but just for you, what would that day look like?
I would wake up when my body felt like it. Hopefully that would be before the sun rose so that I could see the sunrise. I would probably do some sort of meditation or be in God's word early in the morning and be with my family, as they get ready. My household's kind of hustle and bustle in the morning, which I enjoy too. Our kids are older, but they're still all at home, and I love that they're all still here. So, everybody getting ready for work and all those things. I would definitely work out. One of the first things I do every day is work out and then make a very nutritious breakfast and probably do some editing after breakfast, probably have some client calls, probably be in some sort of mastermind call to fill myself up, and another coaching call to get poured into for me. Obviously lunch, another nutritious lunch. And we cook dinner as a family a lot. So I love to do that with my kids and my husband, and then go for a nice walk after dinner with the dogs out. We have 10 acres out here, be out in nature, and then make sure to wind down and probably do another meditation while I go to sleep, and then get up and do it all over again.
That sounds like a good Groundhog's Day. Just to do, just to repeat that same day over and over again. Thank you for sharing that, Christina. You have left us with a lot of good stuff today about yourself, about how we can redefine our relationship with food, the importance of storytelling. But if you want our audience to remember just one thing from our conversation today, what would that be?
Just that you are enough, just as you are. And that, to give yourself grace, you're doing the best that you can with what you've been given.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that even if you're not doing exactly what you want to or acting the way that you want to at this time, you can always learn. And then when we learn better, we do better.
Sage advice. So thank you for that, Christina. And my last question for you is, if people want to get in touch with you, purchase your book, find out more about the Soul Story Collective, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so my email is info@CristinaPSimmons.com. And my website is CristinaPSimmons.com. I'm trying to keep everything pretty simple. There is no H in Cristina, though. So Cristina. Got to make sure you spell it correctly. And then, connect with me on social media. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. I just started TikTok a few months ago. That's been an adventure trying to figure that out. So, yeah. And then you can get my book on Amazon.
And I will make sure all of your contact information gets into the episode notes before we go live. Cristina, with that, thank you so much for just a great conversation today. I truly enjoyed it, and I hope we can do it again in the future sometime.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I love being here with you.
You're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.